Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for part 20. That's just 10, do it again, 20, of this record collection tour that we are doing. When we last left off, we were just starting out the P section, and spoiler alert for the remainder of the video, we are going to be continuing in the P section for the duration. Now that said, there are a lot of great artists in this section, so stay tuned, don't turn that dial. Although having said that, we kind of blow our load with the first one of these, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Because, of course, I have a copy of this. Pretty much everybody with a working record player, and some people who do not have one, own this record on vinyl. I don't know if this is my favorite Pink Floyd record. I think if you had asked me about a year ago, I would say yes, definitely Dark Side is my favorite Pink Floyd record. I think nowadays there's maybe one or two that sneak in at least an equal tier, if not even slightly above. But there can be no doubt about what makes this record work, which is that kind of conceptual bent, a concept that is lowbrow enough to appeal to almost the lowest common denominator, but also executed well enough with interesting enough music to be enjoyable for even the most hardcore, die-hard music listener. It's a terrific flowing record, probably some of the best album flow you will ever hear, and also just sounds phenomenal as well. Can't say enough about the mixing and the engineering job on it. Yeah, I'm a little bit sad that I only have two Pink Floyd records. They are, I don't know if they're a top 10 band for me. They're not that far away from being one, though, because I think most of what they put out is genuinely really good. Even some of the more obscure records, like Obscured by Clouds, I think is actually a great album. Or even like the soundtrack album, More, I think that album is very underrated. As well as some of their later stuff, which we'll get to right here, because this is the only other Pink Floyd record that I own on vinyl. I don't like the final cut very much. That's one of my least favorite Pink Floyd records, if I had to put a ranking on it right now. But I do like this one, A Momentary Lapse of Reason. I am partial to the stuff that they did post Roger Waters, with the exception of The Endless River, which is just, it exists. It's fine for what it is. But Momentary Lapse of Reason and The Division Bell, which I really want to get my hands on, but that one is a little bit pricey. I think they're good albums. Even if Momentary Lapse of Reason has not aged well sonically, I still think it contains some interesting bits of songwriting. I really like Learning to Fly and The Dogs of War. On the Turning Away, I genuinely love. I like Terminal Frost. It's not what the band were before this. I mean, it's a very different and very conscious shift. And you hear me talk about kind of Gilmour's merit as a musician and as a songwriter in his own right. When you go back to whatever video it was where I talk about David Gilmour's On an Island, an album that I love. I don't love Momentary Lapse. I like it. Division Bell I really like. But yeah. I'm happy to own it. But I definitely need to beef up that Pink Floyd collection because it's a very random pair of records to own, admittedly. From one piece of classic rock royalty to another, I talked about Led Zeppelin already. Now we have a couple of Robert Plant solo records to go through. This is probably his most acclaimed solo record, Now in Zen, which I believe is either his third or his fourth. Memory escapes me. From 1988. Plant's solo career, I've only heard a couple of his albums, and I'm pretty sure it's actually just the two that I own. I don't think I've heard any others. But I really like what I've heard of them, or heard of his stuff. I think the directions that he goes in, whether it's embracing some contemporary influences or whether it's kind of his later stuff where he really leans into traditional R&B, like traditional like bluesier sounds, like country Americana types of things, more into the folkier side of things. Folk Zeppelin is oftentimes my favorite kind of Zeppelin, and the fact that Plant leans into it on some of his records, quite a few of his records, from my understanding, I think is really cool. So happy to own Now and Zen. This one is actually a little bit hard to find nowadays, but I was able to pick it up at a Barnes & Noble for 50% off. This is Lullaby and the Ceaseless Roar from 2014, if memory serves. Check the copyright date. Yes. Gatefold record. Show you the inside of that. I love the artwork. It's a beautiful, beautiful album, visually and aesthetically. I really like this thing. And I remember the actual press fair behind this one, kind of the hype to it being released. 2013, 2014 was kind of when I first began being aware of this stuff. This was around the time that I got a Spotify account for the first time. And, you know, I had the free version of Spotify at the time, so I would be getting all these advertisements for some of these new albums that were connected to artists I was listening to. So I listened to Led Zeppelin. I got advertisements for the new Robert Plant record. I was listening to Elton John a bit at the time, not as much as I do now, but a bit. I got a lot of advertisements for the Diving Board when that record came out. And I remember those two things very vividly, 2013 and 2014 for Elton and Robert respectively. So yeah, that particular period is always going to hold a little bit of a stronger place in my heart. But Lullaby and the Ceaseless Roar, to my understanding, is one of his more acclaimed records generally. I think actually a lot of his late 2000s, like once you hit Raising Sand with Alison Krauss, which somehow I have not heard yet, once you get to that point, I think it's hard to go wrong with a lot of his records. Again, I'm going off a critical consensus here, so forgive me. A record that I have not heard, got this as part of another collection. This is the Pointer Sisters, Break Out. Pointer Sisters are a group that have interested me, for sure. Produced by Richard Perry, which is really cool. But I'd be lying if I said I knew really anything about their discography and the music that they create beyond just kind of the genre of it, I suppose. So a band that I would like to, a group, I suppose, that I would like to explore more in the future. This group I am very familiar with, and now we come to a complete albums collection. Oh, yay. That is The Police. We start with the debut, Outlandos de Amor. I will say The Police are a band that, for the most part, get better as they go. Well, actually, I'll take that back. That's not really true. I think in some ways they do, but my actual album ranking of The Police would be a little bit wonky, at least going off of where I currently have them. I think whenever I do a video on their discography, that will probably change. You know, this one, there's a bit more of kind of a punkier influence, more aggressive sound to it. And I like that. I do, because I think this is where you really get to hear their chops as musicians. But I think when you get to later records, the compositions become a little bit more sophisticated. But I can't deny Roxanne and Can't Stand Losing You being the big hits off of this record. You know, they're great. They're infectious songs. And let's talk about Sting for a second. And we will talk more about him later because I do have some Sting stuff on vinyl. People know who he is. I mean, he's a household name pretty much. People know who he is. People know he's a talented musician. I don't think people understand how good of a bassist he was, still is really, and how good of a singer he was, and kind of pretty much still is. He is really just on fire in all of these records, as well as some of his early solo stuff. And these really early Police records where he's just kind of screaming his head off some of the time, I think they're really cool. Regatta de Blanc, second record. Here we go. This is my least favorite Police record, if I were to rank them now. I think it does a lot of the same stuff that Outlandos de Amor does, but I don't think the songwriting in general is as sharp. Message in a Bottle, Bring On the Night, Walking on the Moon is terrific. But I have a little bit less time for this one than the debut. Not that much less. I mean, there's not a substantial difference in how I would rank them, but that one would probably be my bottom. And then Zenyatta Mandata, right now, would probably be my top, believe it or not. I think this is the bridge between their early stuff. It still has that kind of aggression with some of the more kind of interesting compositional ideas. They're adding more keyboards to the mix here at this point. I think the entire first side, I mean, everything is great. Everything is great. It's a rock solid, extremely consistent record, which I think is part of what serves it really well. But the first side of the album, especially, I think that is, I don't think there's a misstep there. And if the second side is weaker, it's not that much weaker. Da-da-da-da. I think it's great. I like Man in a Suitcase. Shadows in the Rain is great. And yeah, it's sharp. Voices Inside My Head and Canary in a Coal Mine from the first side are great. And then we all know Don't Stand So Close to Me. Very infectious. Yeah, I think the Police just, they really capture the, I don't know what to say. I think they're a band that on some level is based upon a stereotype, right? These are white guys doing reggae-inspired music, reggae-inspired rock music. And I will grant you that the singing, specifically the enunciations that Sting does on some of these records, is a little bit embarrassing. But I think they make up for that by being some of the most talented musicians at their respective instruments of that time period, for sure. I mean, we talk about Rush in that context all the time. Being a rock trio that had three of their most talented musicians at their instruments. The Police were kind of right up there. I just don't think they were as flashy about it. I think everyone will tell you that Stuart Copeland was one of the best rock drummers probably of all time. Sting absolutely stands up there with rock bassists. And Andy Summers, he's the overlooked one, like Lifeson is in Rush, but he does some very impressive stuff and fits the mold extremely well. And yeah, I've got nothing bad to say about it. I think it's great. I think they're great. And I think this is great. Ghost in the Machine. An album that I think the first time I heard it, I underrated it a little bit. In fact, I think the first time I heard it, it might have been my least favorite. But then I re-listened to it and I educated myself. This is fantastic. Arguably their best sounding record. Again, kind of speaks to that Zenyatta Mandata level of consistency, where I think both sides of this are rock solid. There's not really a misstep here. Yeah, I think it's terrific. Great album. And see, here's the thing. I have Synchronicity here. This is the only, all the other Police records, barring, no, that's not true. I think all but one of the Police records I got as part of a collection. Ghost in the Machine was the only one that I had to buy elsewhere. Here's what I will say about Synchronicity. Synchronicity is maybe their most important record and the one that has made the most lasting impact on pop music. Some would argue their debut. I think that would be a fair argument. And a lot of people say that Synchronicity is their best record. I think that's a fair argument. For me, I think the inconsistency in song quality, there's a couple of tracks in here that I am not particularly fond of. Actually, I don't think the first side in general is something that I'm super crazy about. I think that inconsistency hurts it for me. And as we were sitting right now, this is probably right smack dab in the middle of my Police rankings. Now, when it's good, it is fantastic. I think most of side 2 is stellar. But, you know, they are a consistent band overall in terms of quality. I mean, when I say that Regatta de Blanc is my least favorite, I mean in the sense of, like, I would still happily put this on the turntable. I mean, they They broke up when they needed to, is what I will say. Like, I don't know if this level of quality would have lasted for that much longer, especially knowing the different directions that the band members were being pulled in and their own kind of issues with each other. But goodness, yeah, this is great. Great album. Not my favorite. Maybe that's controversial, and maybe that will change when I re-listen. I don't know. We will see. Okay. Another record that I acquired as part of a collection that I have not heard before, although I've heard some very good things about it. This is a Blue Note Records reissue of Jean-Luc Ponty's Cantaloupe Island. And this is actually a gatefold release here. I'm going to show you that. I've heard some interesting things about this record. Ponty, if you're not aware, was an electric violinist who is most famous for being one of the kind of members, rotating cast of characters, if you will, of the Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa's group. Zappa is on here. And, you know, I'll have opportunity to talk a tiny bit about Zappa later on, and kind of his overall influence. I actually don't have, any Zappa solo records. I have one Mothers of Invention record, which I included as part of the Zappa stuff, which we'll get to. That is a whole world of music where I have explored it to some level. I've heard quite a few Mothers of Invention records, not all of the essential ones. And I've heard some Zappa solo stuff. I would probably go the cliched route of saying that Hot Rats is probably my favorite Zappa or Zappa-related project that I've heard, including the Captain Beefheart stuff that I've listened to. And I've really enjoyed it, and I think it's really clever, really smart, and exceptionally technical. I think it's fantastic, the stuff that they are doing on those records. So I'm curious, whenever I get around to listening to Cantaloupe Island, if any of you have heard it, have comments, feedback, or whatever about that record, I would love to know it. I don't know that much about it, but I know what the Zappa sound is, and I know that it is a trip, and it is an acquired taste, but I do like it. I do enjoy that taste. And I'm about to blow everybody's mind by transitioning from a Zappa-adjacent record, so talking about Frank Zappa, to talking about Post Malone. I feel like the types of people who are going to be likely to watch this video are going to be stunned by the fact that I own a Post Malone record on vinyl. This is Beer Bongs and Bentleys, by the way, for anyone who is not aware. I think the vinyl record specifically has a different cover from what you see on streaming services, and I think the CD has the streaming cover too. Excuse me. Post Malone, I have a lot of complex feelings about. What I'll say about him is I do think that for the most part, he is a genuine, extremely genuine, very engaging personality. I understand some people have held some things against him because he said some weird things about hip hop at one point, calling it not music or whatever the hell it was. But the guy himself seems like a genuinely decent person, a genuinely nice, kind soul. Take it for what you will, for whatever that's worth. His music, I go back and forth. I think he has moments where I can't stand what he's trying to do. He has a very forward personality, and you can hear that in how his music is produced, the effects that he uses on his vocals, very strong auto-tune on his vocals. And when I say that, I don't mean auto-tune in like the Share Believe sense where you have that sort of artifact. I mean, they are utilizing it, or a program that's similar to it, in a way that causes his voice to vibrate in a very distinct way sometimes. It's clearly intentional. It's clearly a chosen effect. But it can definitely get a little bit obnoxious at times. That said, I think Beer Bongs and Bentleys is actually a very good album. And I think that is because He sort of runs the gamut of doing a few different genres or genre adjacent things. Are his lyrics poetry? No, I think his lyrics are pretty bad for the most part. I mean, they're not very good. What is there to say? But I do think that as an interpreter of song, as someone who can put a bit of genuine power into his voice, I think Post Malone actually sells these tracks pretty damn well. I got this record for a couple of songs, specifically Rockstar. I think that's great. I think that's a great pop song. I love 21 Savage's cover on contribution to that song. And then Stay on the second record on this LP set, the song Stay. Yeah, I think that's a great bit of production. It is completely different from most everything else on that record in terms of the acoustic focus that it has. And, you know, I'm not saying Post Malone could do a rock album and could sell it. I certainly don't think he could do a folk album and sell it. But as a bit of a novelty track on here, I think it works really well. And yeah, I think it's a great melody and it's good stuff. So yeah, Beer Bongs and Bentleys. Probably, yeah, it's my favorite Post Malone record. I prefer it to Hollywood's Bleeding. This record I have not heard, but I picked it up on a whim because I've heard really good things about it, and I'm excited to listen to this at some point. This is Jessica Pratt's Quiet Signs, which I got at a Barnes & Noble for 25% off, which I thought was a very good deal for a record that I've heard enough people who I trust say that it's fantastic that I'm like, yep, I am going to enjoy this. So I figured I wouldn't pass up that deal. So very excited to hear it. Elvis time. You knew it was going to come. But the first thing I have to show is actually this thing that came as part of a I ordered a record online. I think this one was through Discogs, and this came with it. It is Elvis, his songs of inspiration. It is Beat to Hell. And if this was like meant to be an actual record cover, like if this is the right material even, I mean, it is extremely water damaged. But the record's in there, and I mean, doesn't look awful. It is Elvis doing inspirational songs. I mean, it's a collection of stuff. This was put out in 1977. And I think based off of the text on the back and just the timing of it, I'm pretty sure this was just something that they rushed out shortly after he died to kind of take advantage of that. So I don't know. I like gospel Elvis, and I really like it in some cases. Is it my favorite style of his? Not really, but nothing to sneeze at either. And you could tell that he had a genuine passion for the music. Okay, a couple of soundtrack records. Possibly his best soundtrack record. In fact, I might be so bold as to say that. King Creole. I have not watched a single Elvis Presley movie. I will change that at some point, but I'm not especially in a rush to. But King Creole, I have heard, is considered one of his better movies. The soundtrack of this is, like I said, probably his best soundtrack. It contains Hard-Headed Woman, which I really like, and it contains Trouble, which is just a dominating vocal performance. He led off with that song when he did the comeback special in 1968. That was a big deal. And it just works. It works for the image that he had, that bad boy image that he was trying to cultivate. And it's leading into like the refrain where his voice kind of builds up, hits that high G. I think that's just a beautiful bit of, a powerful bit of singing, a gritty bit of singing. And then we get to a soundtrack that pretty much exists. This is not especially a highlight for me, although I don't think this is the absolute worst thing he ever did either. This is Clam Bake. A lot of the soundtracks I have not heard in a considerable while. Although I will say Elvis is not going to be super far down the line as far as discographies that I do. You know, he will be, he'll be coming. He'll be coming. Don't worry about it. But yeah, most of his soundtracks I think exist. I don't think they're anything that, I don't think there's anything that's offensively bad on any of his soundtrack records. But for the most part, Elvis is the definition of a singles artist, and I don't think his albums, for the most part, have a lot of merit. Now, there are a couple of exceptions. Early on in his career, you have his first 3 proper studio albums that aren't soundtracks and that aren't Christmas records, including Elvis Is Back from 1960, which some people say is his best. And then you have some of his stuff from the late 60s and early 70s, where this is immediately after the comeback special. He's trying to get in touch with his musical roots a little bit, so he's going back into kind of country music and rockabilly a little bit more. So that's where you have From Elvis in Memphis, which is great. And then we have this one, which might be my favorite of the bunch, Elvis Country. The one downside to this record is the kind of through line to it. So the subtitle to this record is Elvis Country, I'm 10,000 Years Old. There's a song called I Was Born About 10,000 Years Ago that they recorded during the sessions for this album. They include segments of it as kind of transitions between each of the different songs. Like the song will end, they'll play like 10, 15 seconds of I Was Born About 10,000 Years Ago, and then they will fade into the next song. It's very strange. I don't think it really works, but what we have here is really strong. And it contains maybe the best vocal that he ever put to record, although it's really tough between a couple of those. His version of Tomorrow Never Comes is unreal to listen to. And if you get the chance, listen to the version of it that that stems from, like, listen to the version of it that's stripped back, if that makes sense. I don't remember if it was on, it's not a deluxe edition of Elvis Country. I think it was a box set that came out not too long ago, where you can hear Tomorrow Never Comes without the additional orchestration and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that the additional orchestration doesn't work, but I do appreciate when you are able to hear it more stripped back, and you can just hear his voice just add that grit as the band kind of, they increase the dynamics in and of themselves. They don't need the orchestral help, and it's powerful just hearing that more intimate setting and how into it he gets. It's so damn good. Okay, so I realized that the next record that I had to show you guys was actually hanging on my wall, so I had to run and grab it. Because we are entering the section of Minnesota's very own Prince. And we begin with the record that was hanging on my wall, his 4th album, Controversy. I actually have I don't want to say an extensive Prince collection, because really this is just a small percentage of the records that he released, but I would say it is bigger and more eclectic than the average person's Prince collection, so make of that what you will. Controversy. To me, this is his first front-to-back fantastic album. I don't think Dirty Mind is quite at this level. It's not far away, but I think Controversy sounds better, for one thing. This is really your introduction to what Prince is going to become for the 80s, and really to some extent for the rest of his career. And God, almost every song on here I think is really terrific. The title track, Private Joy, Anti-Christian, Jack You Off. Yeah, it's a terrific album, and it's one of the great iconic Prince covers. I mean, that's why I have it on my wall. It's not my favorite Prince record by any means, but how can you not associate that image with Prince more than almost any other? It's really well done. I should say I have heard pretty much every Prince album, except for one, which we'll actually get to, but I heard Prince's entire catalog for the first time in March of 2020, kind of as the world was sliding into COVID, and really, I don't know, starting to panic. My soundtrack to that was the discography of Prince, which was really interesting. It's an interesting context to be able to reflect on and be like, wow, the first time I heard most of these albums was when the world was absolutely falling apart. But not the first time I'd heard this record in full, thankfully. Purple Rain. What can you say about Purple Rain? This is the remaster, based off the remaster that they did in 2015. I am trying to remember if I got this. There's two places I could have gotten this. In fact, now I think about it, I'm pretty sure I just got this at a Target. The next record that I have to show, I got at a more interesting place. What is there to say about Purple Rain? It is a classic front to back. There are no missteps at all. It is one of the best albums of the 1980s. I've not seen the film. I will say that. Maybe I need to revoke my Prince fan card because of that. I do own it on Blu-ray because I found it really cheap somewhere, but I have not watched it yet. But yeah, I mean, you know, at this point, it's kind of like, I look at this track list and I'm like, is there a song that I even think is like just good? And I don't know that there is. The band that he has here combine his band plus his own talents, obviously, with the setting of it all. So many of these songs recorded in live settings. It works so damn well. And I could not pick a favorite from here. I mean, I'm extremely partial to The Beautiful Ones. Extremely partial to that record. But, yeah, I don't know. It's really fantastic. I take it back. I got this at an actual record store, the name of which escapes me, but I did not get it at Target. But this one, though, this record, to me, it's one of Prince's most underrated ones in the sense that I think people need to actually consistently talk about it as one of his best. Parade. Where did I get this record, you may ask? The answer is Paisley Park. Last summer, I went to Paisley Park with a friend of mine. We went on a tour. We didn't do the extended version. They have multiple different types of tours. The entry-level version itself is like an hour and a half. It's really in-depth and really cool, but you can do an even longer version if you fork out like twice the cash, which is like 3 hours, and you get like exclusive stuff. I do want to do that one day. But I did get to see Paisley Park. It was really cool. And at the end, they funnel you to a gift shop, which has all the Prince memorabilia you could ever hope for. I knew I wanted to get at least one thing from there, and this was the record I picked up. Great album. Kiss is the single that everybody knows, and it's fantastic. But I think Under the Cherry Moon, Venus de Milo, Mountains, and Sometimes It Snows in April, the closing track, rank among some of the best things he ever did. And really, it doesn't miss from front to back. I think if I had to rank the records, right now, Parade would be my third favorite. Purple Rain would probably be my favorite, but it would be neck and neck between that one and this one. Of course, I'm talking about Sign of the Times. See that? There's the Target reference. Limited edition. So this was released on vinyl, re-released on vinyl, in conjunction with that insane Super Deluxe box set, which I have not bought. I kind of want to, but it's a lot, isn't it? It's a lot of money. But yeah, what's there to say? I mean, the songwriting here is about on par with his very best 80s stuff, but spread out over 2 records rather than one. And you really get a sense like this record marks a shift in his sound, I think, and really points him to the direction that he would go in the 90s, which is a little bit more like he really leans even further, if that was even possible, into the sex stuff. And every track on here is a highlight, pretty much. The title track, The Ballad of Dorothy Parker, You Got the Look, If I Was Your Girlfriend, and Adore are all fantastic. Yeah, man. Sign of the Times. What more can be said? And now we only have 3 records left, but this is going to be an interesting shift because we go from Sign of the Times to A record that some people say is his worst. I kind of wanted to own this on vinyl because it's funny. I don't actually think it's that bad. This is Rave Unto the Joy Fantastic. Limited edition purple vinyl. Really cool. I believe I got this at Electric Fetus Records in Minneapolis, which, if you didn't know, was Prince's favorite record store that he went to all the time. He went there, actually, I believe, on the Saturday before he died, because it was Record Store Day weekend or something. And you can actually look on the internet and look up the albums that he purchased. Really cool selection. I think James Brown was in there, unsurprisingly. Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad album. I don't think Prince really has more than a couple of true stinkers in his catalog, which is insane given the amount of records that he's released. But it's a bit long, isn't it? It is a little bit kind of, okay, we're leaning into the cheesy side of Prince's sound a bit more than we need to. The title track, Greatest Romance Ever Sold, is fine. Every Day is a Winding Road is kind of fun. Again, this is one of the records that I just strongly associate with pandemic times, or the very beginnings of pandemic times when everything was going to shit. So I have visions of myself like driving around, not really knowing what was going on in the world, while Every Day is a Winding Road was playing in the background. It's a hilarious image when I think about it now. But in any case, 2 LP reissue of the controversial album from Prince on limited edition crystal clear vinyl and rainbow slipmat. The Rainbow Children. To me, Prince's most underrated record. In the sense of, this is completely overlooked by a lot of people when talking about the greatest things that Prince ever did, and to me, this needs to be squarely in the conversation. No, it's not Purple Rain. No, it's not Sign of the Times, and it's not even Parade levels. But the musical achievements here, say what you will about the whole born again Christian thing, you know, throw what you can at me. I will probably agree with whatever your take is. Not born again Christian, Jehovah's Witness is what I meant to say. Pardon me. Say what you will about all that stuff, because I will probably agree with what you're saying. But the lean into full-on jazz music here, the musicians that Prince recruits to play this stuff, I don't even care about the whatever loose concept there is, and, you know, this like idealistic world that Prince is like referring to here. To me, it's all about the music, and this is some of the best playing that you will hear on any Prince record, which is amazing to say, given that we are talking about Prince, one of the most talented multi-instrumentalists in the history of recorded music. It is a bit long, yes, and again, if you think the themes are heavy-handed, then I'm not going to be able to help you, because they are heavy-handed. But like the title track, love it, love the vocal on it, Muse to the Pharaoh, the work, 1 + 1 + 1 is 3, The Everlasting Now. I mean, musically, there's not been a whole lot of records I've listened to that are quite like it. Having that strong of a mixture of jazz, gospel, and straight up R&B influences, and balancing the three of them almost equally, not really leaning into one more than the other. I don't know. I love it. I think it's a great album and needs definitely a bit of reappraisal. And finally, we have an album that I actually have not heard. I have not listened to this one yet. It's the only official like Prince studio release that I have not listened to. It is a posthumous one, and I'm talking about Welcome to America. I got this record at a discounted price. It was still sealed. I was like, sure. I've not heard a ton of great things about the album, but I've not heard too much in the way of bad things. I've heard people, for the most part, say it's decent. And there are certainly at least tracks on here where Prince is taking a very prescient approach to things. The whole like marketing surrounding this record and the whole cultural background that it had was that this was meant to be a take on America and how it deals with racism. And the publicity of this record was coming out right during, you know, post George Floyd, during the Derek Chauvin trials. that this was like one of the great lost Prince records, that Prince wanted to release this, but then shelved it. And it's a lost classic, et cetera, et cetera. And people listened to it and they were like, well, I wouldn't quite go that far. But that it is apparently pretty decent. So I am very curious to listen to this again whenever I get to doing Prince's discography in full, which, make no mistake, I will be doing, because I think Prince is an absolutely fascinating musician. If you have the time to listen to everything he's done, space it out a little bit, maybe, because, Mike the Snare did a fantastic video on Prince's discography, but he brings up the good point that Prince is so consistent in his sound, and a lot of times just in the quality of his music, that in a way it is easier to get fatigued with his discography than it would be someone who has a long discography but has some great records and some really bad records. Prince, the sound you're going to get, and that's going to remain consistent throughout most of his 90s, 2000s, 2010s work. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, you're going to be in for a long haul if you want to actually do the whole thing. But I'm happy to say that I own most of my favorite Prince albums on vinyl. I'm really happy about that. And yeah, and I look forward to collecting more. I'm not sure what's next on the list. Probably something like 1999, Around the World in a Day, Batman maybe. Diamonds and Pearls, that just got re-released a few weeks ago as I'm recording this, so maybe that'll be next on the list. I don't know. But in any case, that is all I've got for you today. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more videos, reviews, record collection tours are to come. Tell a friend as well. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.